What is up, YouTube? In today's video, I'm going to take you through how to calculate your calorie expenditure so ultimately you can transform your body to be shredded, or even just transform your body to be in a lean bulk and put on as much body mass or lean tissue mass as possible without adding too much fat mass. And ultimately, there are a handful of different ways that you can calculate your calorie expenditure, but I'm going to go with 2 online resources to start. So let's hop over to my computer screen right now. You're seeing the tdcalculator.net. This is a great resource as you can fill in some basic information, including your gender, your age, your weight, your height, and then also your activity level, which I did go through and fill all of these in. And I'm going to go with athlete 2 times per day because ultimately, roughly 6 days a week, I am at least training in the gym twice, or I even have a field session in there too, which I would say burns more calories than your normal gym session even. So when I do go through and calculate this, it will give me a rough estimate. It says my maintenance calories would be roughly 3,800 a day. This might be a little high, but this is ultimately why I will use a couple of different resources to calculate out my averages. And ultimately, I would say that heavy exercise, or roughly 3,400, is more realistic for my maintenance number. And then we'll hop over to another resource that you guys can use, and I'll make sure to link these down in the description so you don't have to go through any trouble of finding them. But ultimately, once again, you can just fill out some basic different categories as well as personal attributes, I guess you could call them, to figure out your maintenance calories. And once again, I did go through and do these all again. So my age is 21, I am a male, and then 5'10", and my weight this morning was 218, so that's what I'm going to use. And then once again, you go through and can do your activity level, and then once again, I do have intense exercise 6 to 7 days a week, or 6 to 7 times a week. And roughly, you guys can see on this calculator, once again, 3,450 would be to maintain my weight. And if I hop back over to that one, you do see this heavy exercise was 3,450. So I would say that is roughly my calorie expenditure based on these 2 sources. So ultimately, if you don't trust those online resources for one reason or another, or you just want to test out another method of actually calculating out your basic maintenance calories, I would recommend just a general rule of thumb, and I'll throw it up on screen right there, is ultimately you can just multiply your body weight by 14 to 16. Ultimately, the range between 14 and 16 would be based on your activity level. So people that are sedentary or work a office job 40 hours a week, or just tend to find themselves sitting on a computer, or in general just not very active throughout the day, would like to be, or I would recommend using that 14 number. And then somebody that's super highly active, works out 6 times a week, intense exercise, does cardio as well, would be more like that 16 number. And then obviously, if you fall in between those 2 categories, make your best decision to go anywhere from say 14.5 to 15.5, depending on your activity level. And then also with that, it's not as easy as just going on and figuring out your maintenance calories based on these websites. You do have to put in some work yourself, and ultimately your body composition is not going to just change overnight by eating whatever calories they recommend to you. But ultimately, I'm going to go through a couple more ways of making sure that you do have the correct maintenance calories, as well as you do make sure that you are making progress. The 2 things that you have to do to ultimately find your maintenance calories, and then ultimately keep track of your progress, whether you are trying to put on lean mass and eating in a calorie surplus, or you are ultimately looking to lose some fat mass and eating in a calorie deficit. So ultimately, what you have to do is track your caloric intake through a one way or another. The easiest way, and the way that I would recommend, is download an app like MyFitnessPal, which ultimately you can just find in the iTunes store or the Play Store, or whatever app store you have on your electronic device. But within that app, you'll be able to easily track different foods, and then also just track your calories on a daily basis. And then ultimately, the second thing is to make sure to weigh yourself on a daily basis. And ultimately, your weight will fluctuate on a day-to-day basis, so you cannot solely base if you're eating at maintenance, a surplus, or a deficit based off of one day. And I'll throw up on screen right now some of the reasons that you do gain weight overnight, it says, but ultimately these are just reasons why the scale could look different day to day. A few of those key ones being your carb intake, how much water you're retaining, and then also your sodium intake. But ultimately, a lot of those just revolve around how much water you actually have in your body, and that's a big key factor. So if you do lose 2 pounds in a day, I'm sorry to say that it's not going to be all fat mass. And if you gain 2 pounds in a day, that will definitely not be all muscle mass. But with that, you do want to take a weekly average and go on a week-to-week basis in both your caloric intake as well as your weight. And I'll throw up on screen what I mean by that, which ultimately your weight may vary day to day by 2 pounds roughly, but when you do a weekly average, you can figure out a lot better if you're actually gaining weight or losing weight by the calories you're eating. And then ultimately from that number, you can adjust your caloric intake to either lose fat mass or gain muscle mass. And ultimately, next video, I will go through and set up macros for you all. And I know I did miss last week's post. Ultimately, I'm trying to upload each week, but I will get out these 2 videos for you this week. I do promise that. But with that being said, that is ultimately the way that you can best track and also make sure that you are doing body recomposition in the right way, is to start off by using a macro calculator, and then ultimately going from there to figure out if that number is in fact your maintenance, a surplus, or a deficit for you, and adjusting the calories accordingly will ultimately allow you to either put on lean mass or take off fat mass. And a general rule of thumb that I would recommend is ultimately if you are either going for a surplus or a deficit. For deficits, I would recommend that you do subtract 500 calories, because ultimately there are 3,500 calories in a pound. So that 500 calorie day deficit will ultimately come out to a pound a week, which is a good number to actually hit when you're looking to lose fat mass. You don't want to lose too much fat in a week, as ultimately then you will put yourself at risk of losing lean tissue mass as well, which you definitely do not want to do. So fat loss has to be a bit slower. So a pound a week is a good number. And ultimately think about that. If you did lose 4 pounds every month for a couple months in a row, that could be a huge change to your body recomposition. The only general rules of or exceptions to that rule is if you do have an excess amount of body fat. And then also, I will get more in depth with that with macro calculating in the next video, in terms of if you do have excess amounts of body fat. But ultimately, for most individuals, I would recommend that 500 calorie deficit. And then on the flip side, in a calorie surplus, I would recommend just 200 to 300 extra calories. And ultimately, just maintain that 200 to 300 calorie surplus. And if you notice 1 week that you didn't gain any weight, having that extra 200 to 300 calories, once again, go ahead and bump that up and just repeat, while also adding in progressive overload in your resistance training. And I can almost guarantee that you will see progress in terms of body recomposition in a good way, for that matter. But without further ado, if you did go on to enjoy the video, this quick video, make sure to leave a like, comment down below any questions, comments, concerns you do have, as I know I flew through some of this content. But ultimately, with that being said, have a good day, and I will catch you guys in the next one.